this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey T-Ballers, generosity. Isn't it great to get generosity, but what about giving generosity? On today's show, we have the wonderful guest Bob DePasquale, and he's going to talk about embiggening your life by not getting generosity, really, but giving generosity. Join us coming up next.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Bob, hey, welcome to the show today. We're so glad to have you on. We kind of worked this out some time ago, and we really thank you for your time. But today's episode is on the psychology of generosity, and most people just love to get things, but you've kind of become the generosity guy that talks about improving your life by giving more than getting, and there's a whole psychology of, I guess, a healthy mental attitude for focusing your life toward generosity. How did you get to where you were with the whole generosity mindset?
Well, I'd love to tell you that I was born a super generous person and I've just been a giver my whole life, but that's actually really not truly the story. I had quite an experience when I was 18 years old, and I'd be happy to dive into the whole story, but it changed my life from an emotional and mental perspective, the physical as well, as you'll hear. But it took a couple of years and after that for me to realize how giving the people were around me during that really challenging. And I realized I'm blessed enough to even still be alive. So I might as well be a generous person and give back to the people that I come in contact with. And whether it's been my personal life or my professional life over the past couple of decades, I've done my best to be as generous as I can. And that doesn't always mean with possessions or resources or money. Sometimes it's with, with intellect, or sometimes it's with influence, or sometimes it's just being really nice to people and doing the best that you possibly can to do that. And I think it really does come back around, and I'd love to dive into that. And I know you all have some expertise in the mental health and psychology space, so I'd also like to hear your perspective.
We like to think so from time to time. That gets challenged. I have these social media debates, and one of the people I was debating actually recommended a help site for me they thought I should go to. And I like to respond, I do need all kinds of help. Help is often greatly needed where I live. We need help this time of year raking leaves, and we need help cleaning out the pool, and we need help setting up all this equipment. Yeah, I'm a guy in big need of help. But yeah, we like to share new, as I guess the overused term is, cutting edge ideas with patients to help them really take the power back of their lives. And we do so by challenging some commonly misunderstood psychological concepts, and then some psychological concepts that are just garbage. But one of the things that I found in my industry is it's becoming a very me-centered industry. I mean, I read memes all the time. You gotta love yourself, no problem with that, but everything has limits. But then there are people saying only, exclusively live for yourself. Mm-hmm. And I've had the opportunity traveling around the country, really coast to coast, as a quality assurance consultant, talking with people at the end of their life. The whole selfish living meme wound up being pretty traumatic for them, and pretty tragic, because one of the things I remember, I was doing a survey, and one of the regulations is that family members have to be kept updated about their family member status, and the nursing staff notified them that your family member's death is impending. And I had to interview them, and here's what they told me. These words still ring in my ears today. They said this, I'll just say parent, lived for themselves, now they can die by themselves. And I like to point out to folks that are pushing these social media memes of just live for yourself, that that's not going to turn out well. And Bob, I think you have a better idea about the whole mindset of living with generosity.
I absolutely do. And thanks for kind of that little backdrop and story. That's really powerful. I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of families over the years, and it's been a blessing in my life to understand how people think about their relationships. And the ones that have had the healthiest relationships I've found to have the healthiest overall lives and the best wellness, whether it comes to their physical wellness or their mental health. But if you've ever been on a plane before and you know when they're giving you the information about what to do in case of emergency, they always say take care of yourself first, right? Put your own mask on first before you can put on that of others. And I think that's been misconstrued, that concept in our society when it comes to what we do and how we live our lives and how we contribute to the greater good. And it's not like as you mentioned, it's not let me only try to take care of myself so that I'm fine and I'm healthy, because the human mind, and I'm sure you all would agree, the human mind is designed to be in community and to provide for other people, whether it's your family or people that you work for, or people that you serve in your profession. And so, yes, it's important to take care of yourself. I'm a very, very strong advocate of physical and mental health, and exercise, and challenging the mind so that it's young and healthy. However, it's not so that you can create some empire of your own. It's so that you can support other people, use what you're good at to make the world a better place. And so, absolutely agree with what you're saying. And my life experience is that I wouldn't be here without the generosity and giving of others. So now, why not? Why not give back and take care of myself? Absolutely. But really, the point of it is so that whatever I'm good at, it can be used for good for other people as well.
That's wonderful. And you talked a little bit about life experience. This perspective that we're talking on right now, I think, is sadly kind of a rare perspective nowadays in society. What kind of experiences have you had that kind of changed your perspective or reinforced this perspective that you have?
Sure. So you asked a little bit, Dr. Heath had mentioned, how did I get to where I'm at today? Well, the very quick backstory of my upbringing is that I was born in New York, and I moved to South Florida when I was just 3 years old, and other than college have lived here ever since. And it was quite an experience growing up in this area of the country. It's kind of a melting pot. There's a lot of people from internationals from all over the place. The weather is such that you can be outside all year long and meeting people and playing with your friends. And the world's a little bit different now with social media and technology. I barely ever see my neighbors, but at least when I was growing up, it didn't matter if it was the dead of winter or the middle of the summer, we could be outside, running around as kids. And so community was always really important to me. And I had a great upbringing, loved my parents. Fast forward to when I was 18, I was going off to college, and this is where my experience in life really changed. I don't know about any of you, but when I was 18, I thought I was invincible, whether it was physically or mentally. I thought I was invincible. Right? Like nothing can take you down when you're 18, right? You know everything. You're old enough to leave the house. You're technically an adult. Your parents can't boss you around anymore. And I had the pleasure and opportunity to go back to New York, where my family was from. So not only was I going to go get my education, I was going to play sports, and I was going to spend more time with my family, because I didn't really know my cousins and my aunts and uncles because they were all from New York. And I went up there, and I was at Hofstra University in Long Island, New York. I don't know if anyone's familiar with New York and the universities up there, but Hofstra is not too far from New York City. And I was in training camp playing football my freshman year, 18-year-old invincible kid, also motivated to prove himself to his coaches. And I had what I thought was a groin injury. Now, I know this is a show about mental wellness, but just allow me to talk about how challenging of a physical issue a groin injury is. Another thing, that if you've ever had a groin injury before, you can't stand, walk, twist, turn around, sit up, lay down. It's painful. It really is, depending on how serious the injury is. And so I would be doing these rehab exercises in a college training room, which is, much different than a high school environment. There's, 100 people in there on a given morning of training camp. It's like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and the commotion is just unbelievable. And I'm on this 3-wheeled stool, and I'm shimmying myself across this massive training room. It's probably 100 feet long. And I suppose part of the exercise was actually dodging the people, using those muscles in my hips in that area to strengthen and hopefully recover from this groin injury so I could get back out on the field. And one day, our head trainer, who was all of maybe 5'8", 140 pounds, not a big guy, especially compared to all the athletes in the room at the time. And in order to address everyone's attention, he would have to stand on his stool of his own and scream to get people's attention. And now I don't know if it was just my perspective at the time, but it suddenly got dead silent this one day. And he yells out to me, and they called me Bobby at the time. He's like, "Bobby, you got to get back on the field here. You're acting like a weakling. I'm this, once again, arrogant, somewhat 18-year-old, and the little trainer guy calls me out in front of all my teammates and coaches, right? I felt really challenged, but I knew something was wrong, and I had a more private conversation with him. It was like, Rick, man, something's wrong. Like, yes, I would love to be back out on the field. So he's like, all right, I'm going to send you for some tests. I'm not too worried at this point. I'm thinking, okay, whatever, I'll go get some tests, but I am 18, so I'm technically an adult. I'm driving around Long Island for basically a week and a half, getting every test in the book. I mean, you name it. MRIs, ultrasounds, CAT scans, sonograms, everything to try to figure out what's going on. And these appointments would take forever. I mean, I would go in there and once again, 18, technically an adult, but a kid filling out insurance paperwork by myself, filling out stuff, answering questions. I don't even know what what they even mean or what they're getting at. And I would be there for 2-3 hours during this period of time. So finally I had this appointment one day, and it was actually the day that my parents were coming up for my first ever college game. Now, we knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point, but that was a Thursday. And I expected to go into the appointment, be there for 3 hours, get some tests, come back out and meet my parents back at my uncle's house where they were gonna be staying. And I went into this appointment, and I was in the waiting room for maybe 30 seconds. I didn't even think I sat down, and they called me into the room, and I was like, oh, this is great. I don't have to wait that long. And I still expected to have some more tests and take a while, but I went into this room. I sat down at a desk. The doctor comes in a couple minutes later and sits down in front of me and says, Bobby, you have cancer. And I was like, what? I mean, my jaw hit the desk, and I didn't even know what to say. I was in complete shock. And he said to me, I'm sure you don't believe what I'm even saying. We're going to find you an oncologist to treat you, and we'll talk to you soon. You can go. And that was it. I mean, I was there for less than 5 minutes. And I come out of the building, and it was like divine time. It was like the perfect timing, or the not so perfect timing, depending on how you want to look at it. As soon as I walked out of the building, my phone rang, and it was my mom. And she's, my mom's a pretty chipper, happy person. And she's like, oh, hey, how you doing? We just landed. How'd the appointment go? And I was like, about that. And I had to tell her, to Mom, the doctor said I had cancer. And I mean, I could just feel the air sucked out of the car that they were driving. I mean, she said nothing, but she was screaming all at the same time. And the only thing I remember hearing in that moment was my dad, who was sitting in the other seat on the other side of the car. And he was like, Susan, that's my mom's name. And he was like, what's going on? What's going on? What's wrong? And he knew something was wrong too. And so we met back at my uncle's house and said some prayers and shed a few tears and kind of looked at each other like, what just happened? I was supposed to be this invincible 18-year-old. And the next day, day or two was pretty stressful for us. We got in contact with an oncologist, and he ended up telling me, we're not exactly sure what you need surgery-wise or treatment-wise, but one thing I do not want you to do is drop all your college classes. If you're going to stay up here for treatment, I want you to still go to class, because you need something mentally to keep you keep you on.
Definitely.
Good for him.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the best things, that happened to me during that period of time. So that was a Friday when we had that conversation the next day. And then the following day was Saturday, which was supposed to be my first game. Like I said, I wasn't playing at this point. And my uncle's best friend came to his house, and we didn't know this guy. His name was Tim O'Brien, and he was there for a very, very short period of time. And he introduced himself to me and my parents and said, hey, Bob and Susan and Bobby, here's my keys. So he handed his car keys to my parents and said, I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now, but I want you to have my car so that you can take it for whatever you need. And my parents were flabbergasted. They were like, what? And they almost like dropped his keys, didn't even know what to say. And that was it. I mean, he was like, all the best, said goodbye to my uncle, and left. And that was it. We spent a couple minutes with the guy. And that was Saturday, like I mentioned. And then a couple days went by. Now I had my first college class on Monday morning. I went to it. Everything was normal. Then we took Tim's car, drove it around Creation to a bunch of other doctor's appointments and tests and things. And I had a long day. Tuesday was my second ever college class. Went totally, had a great time, totally fine. Everything was normal. Got out of the class, went to the cafeteria to get something to eat. Knowing that I had to go to some other appointments, but I grabbed the breakfast burrito and I'm sitting there eating it. I had a few minutes and I'm watching the news. Now, you remember those like tube-like televisions that would hang from a bracket, like in the corner of the ceiling of the wall?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Right before flat screens. So I'm watching, and the thing must have been 8 inches wide. I mean, it was not a big television. I'm squinting trying to watch the TV, but I'm watching it. Now the news is on, and I don't know the news stations. I'm not from New York. It's just whatever was on TV is what I was watching. And all of a sudden, a plane hits one of the Twin Towers. And I'm like, oh, wow, what a horrible accident. That's crazy. So I called my dad, who was at my uncle's, and he's like, yeah, I can't believe that happened. And then we're talking for maybe a minute, and all of a sudden, bam, second plane hits the other tower. And he's like, oh, no, that's not an accident. You better come back to your uncle's now. So I don't think I even finished the breakfast burrito. In fact, it's probably still sitting there. And I hopped in the car, and what was typically a 15-minute drive from my school to my uncle's house took me 9 hours. And subsequently, after all this happened, and we'll go into more detail, but I actually have a master's degree in broadcast journalism. So I love media and radio and everything. But trust me, I will never listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again in my life. but it was riveting. I mean, I'm driving in this car, bumper to bumper traffic, people trying to get out of New York City. I see the burning towers in the background, and I ran out of gas in my neighborhood, in my uncle's neighborhood. Car completely ran out of gas. We had to push the car into his driveway. Never forget this. And we're all like silent, like dead silent, just doing whatever we have to do. We don't even know what to say to each other. And we get into the house there after we push my car in, and my aunt is hysterical. I mean, she's like unconsolable. We can't get a hold of my uncle. He was supposed to fly back from Denver. He was on business the night before. And we didn't know if he was in one of those planes or what happened. Finally, at like 8 o'clock at night, he calls and says, hey guys, I'm okay. I'm sure you've been frantic. I'm really sorry, but I haven't been able to get through. The phones have been dead, even out here in Denver. I'm going to try to catch a flight tomorrow, but I'm safe. I'm okay. And everyone's like, oh, thank God. Well, he's like, but unfortunately, my best friend, Tim, who you guys just met, he was in the towers this morning and he died.
Oh my goodness.
We were like, I can't believe that. Here's a guy who did one of the most generous things that I've ever experienced. At that point in my life, it was the most generous thing. And he lost his life, even though, he was such a really, really nice guy. And it turns out that Tim was known for being a very generous person. He was a higher up in the investment banking firm called Cantor Fitzgerald that still exists to this day. And they had a culture of generosity known at this organization. In fact, they donated office space for many years to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis, which is a disease that my cousin has. So they were just known for being generous people. Tim, one of the leaders, and they were really, really known for being giving. Everyone in Cantor Fitzgerald died at that office in Manhattan, died that morning. Luckily, no one from the foundation was in the office that morning. They didn't typically get there as early as the investment bankers did. The only lady who was typically there that early was uncharacteristically late that morning, and it saved her life. She got stuck in the subway below the tower when it got hit, and thank God she survived. But the stories that she has to tell about that day, I mean, 20-something years later, are truly heartbreaking and amazing all at the same time. So that experience in my life hit me really, really hard. And it was a blur for a couple of years, and I'd be happy to kind of get into working through some of the mental aspects of it. But ever since that happened, even the 18-year-old me thought, all right, something that we don't know, or we don't really know how much time we have, right? And so the opportunities that we have to give things to people, whether it's your car, or whether it's opening a door or a big hug or a thank you or a monetary gift, it doesn't matter. We don't know how much time we have to offer up things to other people, so we might as well take advantage of what we do. And so I've tried to live that out since then. And it took me quite a while, though, to work through the emotions of all that happened on that 3 or 5 or 6 day period in my life there when I was 18.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And we that's one of the reasons why we do this podcast. Is we have a collected bank of knowledge, and we can share that out one patient at a time, but we came to see that is effective for that person. But what a shame it would be to die with that ability of sharing that information with many, many others, and that is one of the reasons why we do the podcast. My personal belief is that what you get, your return on investment for taking, your return on investment for just getting things, that will run out as you get older. but you can never outgive yourself. The ROI for generosity, I believe, is just limitless, and it's not about money. It's not about possessions. It's not about material goods, as you pointed out. But I think, as I know we'll get into, we each have some bottle of generosity elixir bound up inside of us that we can share out with other people. And it sounds like that's what you've made a lifestyle of doing.
Yeah, I love that. The generosity elixir. I'm going to use that one.
It's yours, man. Just send me a nickel every time you do.
Oh, here.
Yeah, right. Get an affiliate link to my elixir site. That's awesome. I truly believe that. I think everyone has that opportunity. Now, is it manifest in everyone's situation? No. I think, the situations that we're put in life sometimes can dictate, the way we think about them. But that doesn't mean we can't make adjustments or do our best to understand a different mindset, a different perspective at looking at things. And so I know that when I was 18, I was hit hard, really, really physically. I was hit really, really hard physically with the cancer and treatments. And, I wouldn't wish that time on anyone. But at the same time, I know the lessons that I learned at that period of time. And so there's not a day goes by, and this is not an exaggeration whatsoever, not a day goes by in my life where I don't think about that period of time. Because it ingrained so many things on my mind that took years and years to manifest themselves. So it was about 3 to 4 months that I was physically healed. I was finished with my treatment. It was a pretty intense program, but I was a young and healthy guy. My doctor, my oncologist, who happened to be my cousin, so not the cousin of cystic fibrosis, but my female cousin, the cousin who has CF's sister, one of her best friends was an oncologist, and he was willing to take me in. It would take months to actually see this guy. He's a pretty well-known oncologist up in the New York area. And so he was nice enough and generous enough to treat me, someone who was much younger and had a different type of cancer than he typically treated. But he was just that type of guy. And he realized the dire nature of our situation because I had a very, very aggressive form of cancer. If you didn't make the jump, but I thought it was a groin injury. It was actually testicular cancer. Oh my! And so it had spread up to my abdomen, and it was pretty aggressive. He said, I didn't have very long to live if we wouldn't have caught it. But the good thing was that it was extremely curable. And so he treated me pretty hard. I was done with the treatment. It took me, like I said, 3 to 4 months physically. It probably took me 6 months mentally to work through it all, but literally years to work through all the emotions. You pile all that in with this aggressive 18-year-old king of the world mindset. I thought I was going to be the best cancer patient known to man. I did everything you could possibly do. And I wouldn't say these things were bad, but they weren't the sole reason or even the majority reason of why I was cured, I believe now looking back. But I drank the exact amount of water I thought I was supposed to have to the ounce. I went to bed at the exact moment I was supposed to lay down, set my alarm for the exact time I was supposed to get up. I ate all the foods I was supposed to, ate none of the foods I wasn't supposed to. And I thought I was going to be the greatest cancer patient. I was going to dominate cancer. And like I said, those things were probably helpful, but it was all the other forces in my life and things. And I have umpteen stories. We could be here for hours of different things that happened at that period of time that people sacrificed for me that allowed me to still be here today.
Well, a quick point that I keep hearing you kind of come back to and circle around is it sounds like you're saying you learned to adopt generosity as part of your lifestyle, because I will guarantee you there are listeners on this episode right now that they're saying to themselves, well, that's okay for Bob, and that's okay for the Pope, and that's okay for Mother Teresa. But Bob, I wasn't born that way. Evidently Bob must have been born with that generosity elixir, but it sounds like you're saying that you disagree with that person who would say that even in the midst of tragedy, you don't have to have a perfect life, that even in the midst of tragedy, that you can learn. In our profession, psychology, there's the whole tension between nature versus nurture. Nature, what are you born with genetically? And then nurture, what can you adopt and adapt based on your own mindset and training from other people. But it sounds like you weren't born with some gift of generosity. You learned that.
Yes, absolutely. this is the way I look at it. And I did a lot of psychological research to write my book, but I'm not trained. I actually have a minor in psychology. I'm not nearly as trained as you all are, but I have a little bit of interest and experience looking through, trying to understand how this works in the human mind. And this is what I've, my own, I don't know if you call it a hypothesis, but my own belief is that we do have there is a nature aspect of it, that the human body and mind is designed to support not only itself, but others. I truly believe that. I think what happens in society today is that priorities are given to us, and we're encouraged to use shortcuts and technology and different things in the world to help us make decisions. And we don't actually explore our own ways of manifesting the natural things in our life. So for me, I remember when I was younger, I had a lot of things that I was concentrating on, and I was absolutely not a bad kid, don't get me wrong, but generosity was certainly not one of them. But that doesn't mean that my mind and my body doesn't desire to actually be generous. It's just that I didn't know how to live it out in my life, and everyone can live it out in a different way. So the nurture aspect is actually helping you figure out how to use what you're already naturally designed to do. I mean, it's proven that humans have this desire to help other people and be in community. There's a lady by the name of Wendy Steele who has a TED Talk, and she was, I had her on a podcast. I've spoken to her many times. I consider her a friend of mine. She leads an organization called Impact 100 Global, which is designed to help giving women help support their local communities in a really interactive way, like more than just raising money, but also participating in the causes that are really meaningful there in their community. And I love the mission of the organization, what they do. And the reason why Wendy is so engaging to me is because in this TED Talk, which is at least, it's probably 12, 15 years old now, but it totally stands up, is she talks about the giving hormones. She talks about oxytocin. Women may have heard of this hormone related to childbirth, but it's also known as the bonding hormone. It's involved in lots of other things. But she tells this whole story, or not even a story, but she gives the scientific evidence and proof that giving is truly contagious. And that's why I believe that nature has, we have this natural desire to give. And what she talks about is fascinating to me. It hit me so hard the first time I heard her talk about this, is that, most people, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, Dr. Heath, is that when you receive a gift, it feels good, right? Like, it was my wife's birthday yesterday, right? So when I made her dinner, I know that she was happy that I made her one of her favorite meals, and that's a gift to her, and she loved it. It made her feel good. I'm sure she got a little bit of hit of oxytocin, or maybe, or any one of the, maybe some dopamine and some satisfaction from something. But she got the warm and fuzzies, right? Now, a lot of people will also agree and have experienced that when you are the giver, you also get that hit. You also feel good. You get the warm and fuzzies when you give something because you see it benefiting someone that you care about, or even someone maybe that you don't even know, but you still get that feeling. What goes overlooked and what Wendy stresses is that third party, that a third party onlooker has also been proven to get that oxytocin hit and those warm and fuzzy feelings when it has nothing to do with them, but they just experienced an act of generosity. And that tells me that it's truly contagious, because that person now feels good and they realize, you know what? Maybe I'm designed to give something or do something nice for someone else too. And so that's the science behind it. And that's why I truly believe that we are naturally designed to be givers. But from a nurture perspective, I think sometimes we get distracted by the things that are actually important in life, because we all know that technology and stimulation out there is absolutely abundant. I know that one of the pieces of research that I found is that over 2,100 times per day, we interact with our devices, swiping, texting, calling, surfing the interwebs, scrolling TikTok, whatever it is, but over 2,100 times a day. So you can think about all the amount of messages that we get on a daily basis that could potentially be distracting us from what's really meaningful.
Welcome to Social Media Smackdown. Tonight, the irresistible force meets the illogical object. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to reason!
This next blurb is for all you parents out there, but also with a special warning to people that may have problems with self-esteem and self-concept. I tend to decide for myself what to think about myself. Are there areas for improvement? Certainly. But those with self-concept problems, social media sometimes is not the best place for you. In a recent social media debate, the response was, you should just go kill yourself, and I'll delete the expletive that came after that because I want to stay courteous. But I say this because, parents, you should be aware that there are venomous people on social media who are saying such things to your kids. Be very careful. Be very observant. Yes, be the helicopter parent. You may just save your kid's life, because if they're already thinking about self-harm, the last thing they need is some mindless cretin on social media saying things like, go kill yourself. Now, I almost let it go because that has about zero impact on me, but I didn't let it go because I was aware that if they say it to me, they may be saying it to your child. And this is a special warning from Doc Heath to you to look into what your child is consuming on social media. It may be the you should just go kill yourself, very dangerous pseudo-psychological nonsense. The more you know about what your kid is looking at on social media, the healthier and the safer your kid is.
What a slobber knocker! The winner by Psychological Smackdown, Doc Heath! No pronouns were harmed during the production of this podcast.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
Welcome to the Therapy Bites Art Lab Library, where we have poured over thousands of volumes to bring you the latest Couch Crumbs quote. Oh, would you like a napkin? You're getting crumbs in the book.
That okay. Me eat book.
Oh. And now today's Couch Crumbs quote.
Today's quote comes from Ellen J. Langer, and it says, "It is not primarily our physical selves that limit us, but rather our mindset about our physical limits."
Oh, you got crumbs on the couch. Extra points for you.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
If you want to talk about an imposter, what we get from that is always less, because it is an imposter of what we should be doing, which is spending time with each other. I raised my son telling him, you can't do everything, you have to pick. And so if you're going to choose this over time with a relationship, well, there's feedback with this. Of course, there's a whole loop of hormonal neurotransmitter-based feedback, but it is going to be substandard compared to, as you pointed out, the oxytocin flow and the oxytocin cascade that you would get from interacting with another person, which we're doing right now, which is why we love seeing people's faces, and it's why we love hearing people's voices. Our brains were not engineered to receive reinforcement from this. At the engineering of the human brain, this, and to your listeners, I'm holding up my iPhone. The iPhone did not exist. We're engineered actually structurally, neurologically, to connect to the face of other people. That's why we have a part of our brain called the FFA. In Arkansas, people think that's the Future Farmers of America. A great organization, but that's not what I'm talking about. You don't have a Future Farmers of America structure in your brain. What you do have is a fusiform facial area. It's the fusiform gyrus. And the brain lights up when it sees a facial configuration. This is why people have what's called pareidolia, which is you see faces in clouds, and you see faces in carpet, and you see faces in bathroom wallpaper. Are those faces? No, they're not faces, of course. And my brain's really good at that. I have a weird brain. I love, that's why I spend so much time in the bathroom. My wife, if she's watching, this is the secret. Because my brain is in there picking out faces. Oh, there's a a ghoul and there's a troll and all that. But the brain is literally engineered in its makeup to respond to faces, but also human voice. That's why we have these high-tech mics. It's not because we like spending money on high-tech mics. It is to help the mic most accurately transmit the actual sound of my voice through the ether of the internet and into your ear canal, and then it travels way over here, mainly if you're right-handed. It's more localized here to the left side above your ear in an area called the temporal lobe. It's more diffuse. It's in the right lobe too, but since I'm right-handed, you'll see more activation over there. And that is literally engineered to tag to the human voice, not to a mechanism. And my point being that when we opt for technology over human connection, we're making a mistake. People will sit here and play Angry Birds for hours. No offense to the Angry Birds. I don't want a lawsuit from the Angry Bird people. It's a great game. I love it. But don't choose what may be good. Don't sacrifice what is best, human connection, that's best. Don't sacrifice what is best for what may just be good. I mean, it may be good to be on your phone, but that's not what's best. You have to choose. I like what you say there, Bob, because I completely agree that generosity can be learned, but I'm going to point out a fly in the ointment based on one of my favorite social psychological researchers. You can thank him for helping you reuse towels in hotel bathrooms. Bob Cialdini, a wonderful social psych researcher, helped the hotel industry devise ways to help people reuse towels, and I think that's a good thing, if we can help save our environment. But one of the things that Cialdini says or alludes to, kind of gets at, is there's really no such thing as true altruism. I mean, there's no such thing as pure altruism. And I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm not calling Bob Cialdini the devil, by the way. I am playing devil's advocate. That there are folks that believe that there's no such thing as pure altruism because you're always getting something out of it. Even if it's fuzzy wuzzies, the oxytocin cascade, you're always getting something out of it. And I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think it's possible to just exercise generosity for other people? Do you think there's a pure thing? I don't know. I think it's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. My response is this. I think people can do things with a pure altruistic sense, but their continuation, their consistency inevitably will involve some of the other benefits. And that's why I talk about them all the time, because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think like I said, I think there's some natural human desire to do that. And I think it's good. In fact, I think it's probably better that it's not purely altruistic. And that's why, you mentioned earlier about there are some people out there saying, only take care of yourself. And I think that's why there's a little bit of a flaw in that concept or idea as well, because, if you think about just trying to do things for yourself, it's not actually, I don't believe it's actually necessary, because I think there is benefits, whether you're just trying to be a nice guy or not. You could potentially argue that maybe a parent saving their child, or someone in a completely dire situation, potentially acting completely altruistically, but ultimately there's still some benefit to it, right? Because you could say the only reason why, you could say this once again, maybe playing devil's advocate, you could say the only reason why the parent is saving their child is because the parent doesn't want their child to die, right?
Of course, and they're continuing their lineage.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. They want to feel good about it themselves. But like I said, I kind of agree with it, but I don't think it's actually a bad thing. I think in fact, I would argue that it's good, because that's where it's contagious. That's where it's good. That's where it advances those good feelings, and it puts you in a better situation. I know the people, and one thing I've also realized is what I haven't really found, there's really no law of diminishing returns in the impact and positivity and generosity space. Whereas if you took a drug and eventually you become immune to its effects, right? You become
receptor downgrade.
Exactly. Or maybe, you play Angry Birds for an hour and it's really fun, but if you play it for 3 hours, you get bored of it, even though it's the same game. I have not experienced that whatsoever. and generosity. The people that I know that do service projects or, are involved in great causes, they have never come home from one of these events and said to me, man, this is the 5th time I did this, and it used to be fun, but it's not as meaningful anymore. In fact, it probably gets more meaningful the more that they do it.
I think that you're absolutely right, and it just dawned on me that's probably the downside to the selfishness-based psychology out in social media of just live for yourself, don't do things for others. If you live for yourself, then it'll all work out. Is I do think there is a receptor downgrade. I don't know of a research study that talks about that. This is just Doc Heath's on the moment hypothesis. But I think that, speaking of diminishing returns, that's what I encountered anecdotally with these very aged people, that they did a personal experiment in their lives to just do for themselves, but they die alone.
Well, I had a quick question about that. With that thought process, with things like doing something on your phone, could instant gratification have something to do with it versus something that when you do like a community project or you're helping people further themselves, and then you see that they go on and they do something and it's because of ways that maybe you or you've seen your community get together and help them, it's more of a worked for gratification rather than that instant gratification that you get when playing Angry Birds and you defeat the level and this is like that instant like, yes, I did it, haha. And then but there's no ultimate satisfaction with that because now level 2 starts and you gotta beat it again, or there's nothing that continues on in life from that instant gratification.
Heather, I'm glad you brought this up. I actually have a writing out there a blog that I write about almost 2 years ago now. I wrote about delaying gratification, how it's countercultural. Right with you. I agree with you. The immediacy of specifically social media, but really of anything in life these days, or almost anything, we really are training our brains to be addicted to that immediate gratification, which is just not healthy. I think we can all believe that, and that's why the fastest rising, best social media application right now is TikTok, because they figured out the best way to feed the content that will give people the most immediate dopamine hits as quickly as possible. And you can scroll from video to video. Even if something's a bad video, you can scroll away from it in less than a second and jump to the next one. And we're training our brains to think that way. And when it comes to gratification, you can get it faster, but you can't get it better. And I firmly believe that. And the way I look at it is this: there's probably some spectrum of gratification that you could probably point out 1,000 different levels or spots on the spectrum that you can be. But I break it down into 3 things in my mind. And this is somewhat anecdotal too, like Doc Heath pointed out, but this is the way I look at it. You have those immediate pieces of gratification and things that just come really fast that you really didn't have to work for, but they feel good right in the moment. They're futile, they're unsustainable, and they're ultimately, they lose some of their luster, right? If you start out on Twitter is a perfect example. I'm pretty active on Twitter. And there's a whole host of people out there who talk about this. When you first start Twitter and it's like tweeting into the Twitter sphere and like this universe and no one's listening. Then you start getting a couple people responding or maybe even liking your tweets. And it feels like amazing when like 5 to 10 people respond to you, right? But then after you're a year in, not even a year in, and now 5 to 10 people respond, it's not even that big of a deal anymore. You need 15, you need 20, you need 25, because the effect is lessening on you. Then that's like that first level. The second level of gratification are the things or the second type of gratification that's a little bit more meaningful are the challenges that you've chosen yourself. So not something that the world says is really important, or my neighbor has a Bentley and I bought a Bentley, so I feel good about it. Things that you've actually like chosen yourself that are really meaningful in your life, goals that you've had, whether it's family goals, professional goals, self-development, maybe it's psychologically related to your health, things that you accomplish that you set out to that take a bit of time. Those feel good, and those are really, really helpful for advancement and confidence and making you be the best you can possibly be, right? And I encourage people to always have these because a better version of themselves can be more generous and helpful to others. But there's a whole nother level to this, I think, too, and I've experienced it in my life specifically in doing some international missions and trips to help people that were in need, is that there's nothing more powerful than the gratification of stepping way out of your comfort zone with other people to serve somebody else and not serve yourself. And the delayed gratification of that is amazing. And I had probably the most delayed version of gratification experience I've ever had once when I went back to a small town in Nicaragua that I had been a couple of years prior serving. I don't know if you all are familiar with Habitat for Humanity, but
Oh, yes.
Yes.
part of a trip with doing with what they call their global village and building a home down there. And I had this opportunity to go back a couple of years after I had been there and see a family that I hadn't seen and built for. And the bond and the feeling of joy and gratification years and years later from the work that we did previously was really the most like mountaintop experience I've ever had in my life, because it really drove home what we did. Like in the moment, I knew we were doing something good, but man, was it hard work. And I was willing to get up every day and do stuff that I wouldn't do for my own home. I mean, I wouldn't mix cement by hand and do dry rebar and bend metal and stuff. You wouldn't catch me doing that anytime in my own home, but doing it for someone else with other people was such a bond and such a feeling. Talk about oxytocin. And so going back there 2 years later was the most amazing experience, because now that I not only remember all those good times, but it was also shown to me how powerful that was. I mean, their whole neighborhood was completely transformed. The kids had grown up. They were happier. They were more joyful. They were thankful. They had a purpose in life. So doing those delayed gratification tasks with someone else in mind, there's nothing better than that, in my opinion.
That is awesome. And Bob, your story is really dear to my heart. A year ago right now, we were going through this with my husband on October 29th last year. My husband kept thinking he was having kidney stones, and an intern was interested to see what a kidney stone looked like on a CT, fortunately, and it wasn't a kidney stone. It was testicular cancer, and it had spread, and it had closed off the ureter, so they had to do a nephrostomy tube to save his kidney, and he went through the procedures, the surgeries, the chemo. I understand. I really understand. By the way, November is Testicular Cancer Month. I didn't know if you knew that.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. But I would love to know, from a mental health standpoint, as you processed all of this, how did the mental health field, how did people in the mental health field, how were they helpful? What are things that you found to be helpful, and what are things that you found to not be so helpful as you went on your journey of healing?
So, number one, just to talk about it, it might seem like a kind of a general suggestion, but expressing your thoughts and feelings to people. I had a conversation with someone a couple of years after I went through my treatment, and I'll never forget this conversation. It was probably the most meaningful one I had, because the questions that he asked me were not typically like, how did it feel? Or, where did you go? Or what was your treatment like? And there's nothing wrong with those questions. I think they can be helpful for maybe someone going through it. And obviously you've experienced it, Debbie. So, hearts and thoughts and prayers out to your husband. I thank you for sharing that. But I think it's not just describing what happened to you. It's actually describing your emotions and your feelings. So the conversation I was having was like, okay, so you went through this. What did it feel like to go through that? And how did your body react to it? And they were asking me very, very specific questions on my reactions. And that was extremely helpful for me to work through that in my mind. And I remember specifically talking, I used to have to give myself these shots. I don't know if it still works like this, or the drugs are a little bit different nowadays, but 20 something years ago, when your white blood cell count would go down, your immune system was really taxed because the chemotherapy would affect it. What I had to do was give myself a drug called Neupogen to raise my white blood cell counts. And by the time I was done with my treatment, my legs had become so leathery from sticking this needle in myself for 10 straight days after a round of chemo, that it was really, really challenging. And I had never thought about how stressful that those treatments and it was only a couple seconds a day, but I'll never forget the last day that I ever had to do that. I literally could not get this needle in my leg. I mean, my mom was there with me, and I'm like trying to push this thing. I just could not get it in my thigh, which is where I would poke myself. So I actually ordered my mom. I had never like yelled at my mom before, but I was like, "Mom, get out of here!" Like, I kicked her out of the room, and I did like this hurling, jumping, probably totally unsafe, not advised by the doctor technique to jam this thing in my leg. And I took I think it was my right hand, and I jumped and I landed like on the bed in this room, and I jammed in my leg and took my left hand and slapped the plunger down. And you're supposed to kind of do it slowly to get it in your leg. I mean, I squirted it in there within like half a second. And then I took the syringe, I ripped it out of my leg, and I threw it up against the wall. And my mom comes running in the room. She's like, "Oh my God, what happened? Like, are you okay?" And I'm not saying people should do this, but I didn't realize it at the time. It was just my 18-year-old primal mind thinking that I was just going to, once again, dominate cancer and everything I had to do with it. But this conversation I had with this guy, I remember describing this to him. And he's like, "Well, how did it make you feel mentally? Not just, I know it was hard to get it in your leg." And I realized that was a really, really stressful thing for me. That's why those emotions come out. I mean, why do people scream and yell and jump and get angry and upset? Because they're emotional. And I didn't know at the time. So the question you ask is, what type of questions, or how can mental health professionals be helpful to people? I think it's to take, like clear moments of stress or clear things that stick out in your mind. Like if you ask someone, "Hey, tell me a story about something," the first story or two they tell you are going to be the ones that come to mind first, right? So that's really meaningful to them. And so after that story was over, or after the story is over of whoever you're speaking with, I think it would make sense to ask them specifically, like, how did they feel about that? Have you thought about that since then? What did where did your mind go immediately? Like, were you worried? Were you concerned? Why? Did you think about why you did what you did? And I think those type of things help you be a little bit more introspective rather than just a storyteller. And don't get me wrong, I love a good story. You might be able to tell I love telling stories, but think about the story and what it actually means to you. There's a reason why it's so vivid. So I hope that's helpful, but that's what comes to mind.
Well, that is, was it your experience that the mental health professionals didn't ask about your thoughts as much? They didn't ask about your perceptions, your thoughts about the cancer, about the stress, about all that goes with it. We have a thing about a lot of clinicians just become nodding head dolls. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's terrible. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And they're just nodding head dolls, but they're really not helping the patient process anything cognitively. And we here tend to teach people that emotions, there are 10 basic emotions: happy, sad, mad, glad, disgusted, ashamed, stressed, depressed, anxious, angry. Which ones are bad? None. Which are negative? None. Which are positive? Not really none, any of them. They're just emotions. You have 10 fingers. Which is the bad one? Well, maybe those. Well, no, those are just your middle fingers. It's all what you decide to make of them. What we really zero in on, tell the story. What's your narrative of your experience? What could be videotaped or audio taped. Then the central piece of the puzzle is, what are you deciding to tell yourself about your experience? How are you deciding to interpret your experience? And we find that a lot of clinicians, they tap dance around it, and they never get down to the level of cognitive processing that's important in someone understanding their own experience.
I would tend to agree, and I like how you talk about the emotions not being positive or negative, because the story that I tell, I don't know if you want to call it negative, but it was pretty aggressive about the needle. But there was other things that happened during that time that maybe elicit some more positive, for lack of a better term, emotions, or maybe not such an angry feel.
Well, we tend to talk about preferred and non-preferred emotions. I mean, let's just take anger. Is anger bad? Well, no, anger's not bad. I mean, goodness, if you're a Christian and you read the scriptures, it says go ahead and be angry. Just don't miss the mark. The literal interpretation of that is be angry. It says sin not, but sin is an archery term meaning off the mark. So be angry, but don't miss the mark. Be angry, but don't engage in unhealthy behavior. And my goodness, I mean, why would I not be angry if I have cancer? Because where does anger come from? Anger comes from the thought that the experience I'm undergoing is a threat to my existence. And that is literally how the brain manufactures anger. If I think that something is a threat to me or someone, there is no better emotion than anger, but it really depends on what I'm telling myself about my anger and the associated behavior. What does behavior come from? Same place. Behavior comes from what I am deciding to engage in. I mean, it is behavior is always thought based. I mean, unless it's a seizure, which even that, and I won't get off into that. You know, I'm a neuroscience nerd, but my PhD is in neuropsychology and forensic psychology. But even that literally is thought based. But I won't get off into that. But behavior is also thought based. When you were on the bed there, and you know, plunging the needle in, of course that was anger, but I wouldn't say it was maybe unhealthy. I would say it might have been very cathartic.
And I'm sure it was. And so you asked, you know, what was my experience with clinicians, or, you know, people maybe just being head nodders, if you will. And I think you know, I remember talking with someone once, and I remember telling all these stories and describing all these things, but that's really just what it was. It was letting me talk about it, which I started my response to the previous question with, that's good, you want to talk about it, but you can't just roll through everything and then move on. Like, there's deeper things there. And regardless if it's preferred or non-preferred or whatever it is, I mean, I could easily tell you guys stories for 3 hours, but there's more than just the stories to tell, right? There's other things and emotions and things to work through. So it's like, hey, pause. That's great. Would love to move on to the next story, but maybe tell me a little bit more about what you felt in the moment of that story that you just told me. And that was really helpful.
Fantastic.
That's
Awesome. I think I did that to my husband without realizing it.
In what way?
Well, just engaging him in conversation and wanting to know what he was thinking, what he was experiencing, allowing him to fully express it, and then discussing it with him. You know, let's look at, what are you thinking about that? What are your thoughts? And it's just a natural, I guess with our profession, it's a natural thing to do.
Is that some of the generosity that you've been talking about, Bob? Just giving people a space to share their reality?
That's a great way to put it. I don't think I've ever thought of it this way. I think people underestimate their ability to do things well in the world. And once again, this probably goes back to the overstimulation and the things that the world has told us are important. But in all reality, we all have a unique life experience. Sure, Debbie and I, you know, Debbie's husband and I may have both experienced cancer, but there's a whole host of other things in our life that are different, right? So we both come from a different place to provide something for people. And your reality is a good thing. I mean, your reality and your experiences and things, that the way that you see the world is really, really beneficial to yourself and someone else. And there's what is there, 8 billion people in the world, some crazy number of people. Your experience is not useless. Trust me. If you're listening to this show, the things that you can share and your methods and ways of being generous to people and your perspective on things is infinitely valuable to somebody. And don't ever underestimate that, please.
That's true. One of the sweetest things that my husband said, you know, in all of this, is we were sitting one night and talking about it and all the things, you know, that had happened. And his perspective on it, he said, you know, we've had a lot of opportunities we wouldn't have normally had to bless others. And he was talking about every time he was in the hospital, because he had some complications from the chemo afterwards. We were in the ER quite a bit. But we always, you know, reached out to the nurses, reached out to the staff. We would talk to other people when he was getting chemo. We would talk to the other people there. And he said, we've had opportunities, you know, to reach out and bless others that we wouldn't have normally had. I thought that was a really neat, you know, we got to give. So it was really a neat perspective.
And that's a great point that I think Bob's brought up also, is you don't have to wait for your life to be perfect to start engaging in a lifestyle based in a mindset of generosity. Bob, as we kind of conclude our show today, what recommendation might you have to kind of put some proverbial shoe leather on it for our listeners to go out right away today and start adapting in their own lives a mindset and a practice of generosity?
Well, two things come to mind. One is, there's a lot of talk out there, and we talk about social media. One of the positive things that I see out there on social media is people promoting kindness. Now, depending on where it comes from, if you're just being kind, for remuneration, that's another story. But I think we would all agree on, on this show and call here, being nice to people is helpful. I think that's an expression of generosity, and it's almost kind of a gateway drug. So just being a little bit nicer to people, even if you feel like you're already a nice person, maybe go over and above of being kind to people. And I think you'll be surprised at some of those. You talk about facial responses. I was walking down the street, or actually running the other day in my neighborhood, and someone was walking their dog, and I said good morning and smiled at them, and they were totally like blown away, like, which is sad to say that people in the neighborhood don't say hi to each other anymore. But they were really like they looked up and they were like, oh, thank you, and like they were so thankful that I said hi to them. So that's one thing. Like that right there will kind of get you like a little bit of a taste, if you will, of what it's like to just be a nice person, to offer someone something, and just a kind gesture is a good offering. And so a lot of people might already be implementing that sort of thing. The next thing I said is thinking about specifically what it is that makes you happy, like what brings you joy and what you're really good at. And I guarantee you, I've never had a conversation with someone where we haven't identified something that they're good at and that brings them joy, that they can't offer at least advice, skill, something related to that topic or aspect of their life that they can be generous with. And if you think about it, if it's something that you enjoy doing and you're good at, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, even if you didn't find someone to offer it to, you still had some fun doing it. I think that's a great start. And it might take you all of 5 minutes to sit down and write a few things down. My wife and I are working on writing this devotional, and a lot of the exercises that we're coming up with that are helpful for us as a couple are to write things down that we feel like we can use for good. And the ultimate tool for good, I believe, is generosity, if you haven't been able to tell by my story and what I believe in. So take 5 minutes and write down the things that are meaningful to you, and I bet you'll find something in there that you can use to be generous.
Cue the applause. Bob, I think that's great stuff. I want to thank all you listeners for joining in today. And just a few key takeaways is you do not have to be born with any genetics for generosity. You can learn and you can adapt generosity. And I think Bob's tip there about planned generosity, people plan car maintenance and home maintenance and physical maintenance. You can also plan out generosity. Sit down and do some brainstorming about how you can give back. And I'll leave you today with one of my favorite quotes, and I think you can use this as you're deploying generosity in your life, and that is, the greatest measure of character is what you do for others who can do nothing for you. Thank you guys for being here. Thank Bob for being here. That's wonderful stuff. Go apply it to your life and then big in your life. We'll catch you next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Hey, T-Ballers. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey, T-Ballers, welcome to the episode today. We are privileged to have Dr. Victor Manzo on an episode called The Psychology and Spirituality of the Subconscious. Ooh, spooky, spooky stuff. And Victor, it's so exciting to have him here today because he is a actual professional at de-pretzelizing children who have turned themselves into pretzels. That's a funny way of saying he's a pediatric chiropractor, but we'll get into that next. You guys join us.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking, thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke, anti-free speech, mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and/or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. Go ahead, don't be podgorophobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.